Today we're looking at the NASB Study Bible. The NASB Study Bible is published by Zondervan, and this is obviously the hardback edition. It also comes in leather or bonded leather or any other number of, getting the glare there, the halo right around it. There you go. So you know this is the chosen Bible. NASB Study Bible clocks in at 2,040 pages, and in the back there are not only full color maps, which is standard for most study Bibles, but one feature that I think is pretty cool is there are blank pages for notes, and there are a good number of them. There are about 20 or so pages, so you can write down any notes that you have from the text. You can draw your own maps. You can draw comic books, stick figures reenacting famous Bible stories, or caricatures of historical theologians that you love and adore. Really, it's wide open, literally. Notable contributors to this study Bible include Ronald Youngblood, Kenneth Boa, Walt Kaiser, Edwin Yamauchi, Derek Kidner, Gleason Archer, Thomas McMiskey, Leon Morris, and Robert Mounts. So that's a pretty wide range of broadly evangelical perspectives. It has an abridged concordance in the back, and it also has an index to the notes. So if something's discussed in the notes rather than an actual word in the text, you can look it up in the index. That's kind of helpful. It is double columned, and in the middle column are the cross references and the translation notes to the actual NASB translation as well. So they're kind of all crammed in the middle there, which doesn't leave a lot of room for your own note taking in the margins themselves. In addition to the color maps in the back, there are a few maps sprinkled throughout the text itself, as well as illustrations. Here's one of Ephesus, for instance, and Herod's temple, and Jerusalem during the time of Jesus. So there aren't any photos, but there are some pretty good illustrations and some pretty good maps that are fairly helpful. There's also a harmony of the Gospels that lays out all of the gospel events in a hypothetical chronological order. I'm not a huge fan of that, but some people are, so there's one in here. And there are also a series of essays on the different sections of the Bible. So the Pentateuch, the historical, the wisdom literature, the prophets, the gospels, and one on the intertestamental period between the Old and New Testament, which is really helpful. Since it's published by Zondervan, there's also their in-depth timeline. This is common in a lot of Zondervan study Bibles. It goes for a few pages. The introduction to each book of the Bible is excellent. They're close to a commentary level, so they're up there with the ESV Study Bible or the CSB Study Bible in terms of giving an overview and depth and an outline. Really good book introductions. The pages are semi-gloss, so they don't have that chalky feel that study Bibles that are full color have, but they're pretty smooth, even though they are really thin, but that helps keep the overall size down. Now, this obviously is the NASB translation, so there are a few things to note if you're not familiar with the NASB. It is a very wooden, literal translation. They strive to be as close to the original text as they can, even to the point where it doesn't read very smoothly in English. Another thing the NASB does that I'm not a huge fan of, I must admit. Each verse in the NASB is its own paragraph. So it's not presented in paragraph form like you see in a lot of other translations. Instead, much like the King James, each verse is a new line in the text. Now that's helpful for being able to find a verse really quickly, but it's not always helpful for being able to see the flow, paragraph structure, the overall literary flow of the text. The way that the translators note paragraphs is by putting those verse numbers actually in bold. So whenever you come to a verse number in the text and it's in bold, that's telling you that this is a new paragraph that's beginning. When the NASB has a quote from the Old Testament in the New Testament, they, instead of putting it in bold, they put it in all capital letters, but small caps. So you can still tell when an Old Testament passage is being quoted, which is nice when the translators do that. And because the NASB strives to be as literal as possible, whenever there's a word in the English that had to be added because it doesn't quite have a Greek or a Hebrew equivalent, those will be in italics in the text of the NASB. So if you're a stickler for what is the actual Hebrew or Greek that underlies this translation, then the NASB is helpful in that regard. And that's why a lot of people that get more serious into Bible study really like the NASB. When it comes to Genesis, the notes are fairly non-committal in terms of the issues that we normally look at here at Disciple Dojo. So you don't get a lot of arguing one way or the other for a young earth or an old earth or a framework approach to reading Genesis in terms of the creation passage. You don't really get much committal one way or the other on things like the extent of the flood in Noah's day, whether it was global, whether it was local, who were the sons of God and the daughters of men in Genesis 6. Those questions that people have about these early parts of Genesis, the notes are pretty non-committal. They try to focus on the literary aspects of the text and what the language is saying and what the readers in the original context might have heard. They don't really go into a lot of application for modern readers in terms of those questions that we have about science and metaphysics and things like that. There is a really cool feature on page 16. There's a neat overview of the biblical covenants, and this does a good job of rooting Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy in the world of ancient Near East covenants. And those are things that we're not really familiar with: suzerainty, vassal, treaty covenants, land grant covenants. A lot of readers are unfamiliar with those. So the notes do a good job of anchoring the text into that world of covenant making in the ancient Near East. When we get to Exodus, the NASB Study Bible leans towards the earlier dating, what would be considered the more traditional date of the Exodus in the 1400s rather than in the 1200s, but it doesn't make a big deal about it necessarily. It also mentions other routes of the Exodus, but when it comes to present it, it gives pretty much only the standard traditional route, which puts Mount Sinai down here. It doesn't even mention the Arabian route, which is unfortunate because I think that is probably the most likely route, and it would have been nice for them to at least mention it in the notes, as other Bibles like the Archaeological Study Bible have. And it also places the crossing of the Red Sea not at the Gulf of Suez, but at one of these lakes, and it specifically names Lake Menzala as the Red Sea, which was interesting. I don't love that, I gotta say. There are good illustrations of the tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant. Again, helpful when you're reading the later passages in Exodus of descriptions of these implements and things start to bog down a little bit. It's good to be able to have a visual reference of what you're reading about, that God is giving directions for Israel to create. When we come to Romans 7, the notes are pretty non-committal, but they're really overly simplistic, I gotta say. They do note the disagreement among interpreters on Romans, particularly verses 13 through 25, and they give a very short summary, but in my opinion, a little too simplistic for a study Bible of this nature. Interestingly, the note on Romans chapter 9, verse 13 about Jacob I have loved, Esau I have hated, where Paul is quoting from an Old Testament prophet who's talking about the nations of Edom and Israel. The note to that in this study Bible just simply asserts, well, no, this is talking about individuals and individual salvation, and doesn't really even acknowledge what I think would be the more likely reading of this passage, which is Paul is talking about the corporate nature of God's using peoples and nations for his glory and his sovereign purposes. But again, that's a debate, a theological debate, so I don't expect a study Bible to go too in depth on it. It was just interesting how it was almost completely brushed aside with an assertion and not much else. And then in Romans 11, on the question of all Israel will be saved, is that talking about a future ingathering of ethnic Jews? Is that talking about the way that Jews and Gentiles together are being formed into all Israel? Theologians and interpreters have debated that passage for centuries. The notes are pretty non-committal. They don't go one way or another on it. When we come to Revelation, the notes are good in giving an overview of the different ways Revelation has been read, the different approaches to the book, things like the millennial views or historicist, preterist, idealist, futurist. It does a good job. It will give you a sense of these are the different ways Christians have read this book. And when it comes to Laodicea in chapter 3, it actually gets it right about the hot and the cold and Laodicea having to pipe their water in from the two surrounding cities. And so that's just an example of how a study Bible can bring in background information that you would not have access to if you're just reading the text itself, that can illuminate the text, that can give you information that the original audience, the original readers would have had that we today don't necessarily have, and it helps us make more sense of the passage. If you want to know why that passage in particular is important, then hit this link to our session in Bible for the Rest of Us, where we deal specifically with the Laodicean church and the concepts of hot, cold, and lukewarm. Other random observations: when it comes to Goliath's height in 1 Samuel 17, I was disappointed they don't even mention the Dead Sea Scrolls or the Septuagint as giving Goliath's actual height. They just go with the Masoretic text reading, and that gives the traditional around 9 feet tall, rather than the original and probably more accurate around 7 feet tall. For more on that, click there. Now, on one issue where the church is divided, that of complementarianism or egalitarianism, the NASB Study Bible does a good job when it comes to passages like 1 Corinthians 14 or 1 Timothy chapter 2 in presenting the different ways that egalitarians and complementarians both read the passage. That's the mark of a good study Bible. Whenever Christians seriously dispute a theological issue that arises from one or another ways of reading the text, a good study Bible presents the evidence for both, and then it lets you, the reader, make up your mind. I appreciate that in a good study Bible. And in that regard, the NASB Study Bible does good for a wide range of Christian traditions. So, would I recommend the NASB Study Bible? I'll say this, if the NASB is your favorite translation, if you're an NASB person, then this is a really good study Bible. This could even be your primary study Bible, especially if you're more into historical, contextual, or exegetical understandings and interpreting the text. If you're a Bible nerd, then this would be a good study Bible if you like the NASB. For more general readers, for people who are maybe seekers or people who are newer in the faith, or people who want more than just kind of a theological academic study of the text, I would probably recommend getting the Life Application Bible in the NASB translation. For most people, I think that would be the way to go. But for people who are wanting to dig a little deeper, who are wanting a little more scholarship and a little less application, this is a great resource to have. So those are my thoughts. What are yours? Have you used this one? Do you enjoy it? Do you like it? Do you not like it? Comment below and tell me what you think. And if you enjoy this video and the others that we've done in this series and you want to help us continue to make more of them, looking at all the study Bibles that are out there on the market, overwhelming people as they stand in bookstores, looking at row after row of study Bibles that seemingly go on forever, we will try to get to as many as we can, but that depends on you guys. If you like and subscribe and tell other people about these videos, that is the best way to help us continue this teaching ministry of Disciple Dojo. Be sure to check out our free course, Bible for the Rest of Us. It's a course all about how to read, interpret, understand the Bible in its context. If you've never picked up a Bible in your life, or you've been studying it for 50 years, Bible for the Rest of Us has something for you, and I guarantee you'll learn something and you'll grow in it. You can use it for individual study, or you can use it for small groups. There's a PDF workbook that's absolutely free to download and print as many copies as you want, and it's all available at Disciple Dojo's website. So you can click right here and it'll take you to that course. Again, entirely free. Seriously, no strings attached, no email mailing lists, no spam, no scams. It's legitimately free. That's it, guys. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time here at Disciple Dojo.